Hello, I'm the Culture Genie. The topic of today is going to be how you can understand the terms about God, about divinity, about the higher powers. We use a lot of words to describe different types of gods and supernatural entities and our relationship to them. But what do they mean? You might even have sometimes wondered why certain terms are used. Well, wonder no more. I am here to help with regard to the most common of these words. Terms, after all, is the foundation of understanding. So, let us help you with understanding religion and the divine with terms about the number of gods. Polytheism, the idea that there are many gods. This is present in many of the older religions, such as the Norse, the Greeks, and so on. But also in certain modern religions, such as in Hinduism and Japanese Shinto, we have polytheistic pantheons. It should be mentioned that certain forms of Hinduism actually have beliefs that all of their various gods are in fact just versions of one god. So they do have some sort of monotheism in a way. The reverse can also be argued with certain religions such as Christianity, which is widely considered a monotheistic religion, but does have some polytheistic elements with the Trinity. In that Christian denominations that believe in the Trinity and certain Hindu groups actually believe that all the gods or the aspects of the Trinity are actually one omnipotent deity. Polytheism means having many gods, but there is another type of theism with more than one god, and that is dualism. The idea that there exists two opposing gods or forces that are at the center of the world or controls the world. You have the ancient Persian religion of Zoroastrianism with Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, and you have various Abrahamic sects with beliefs in God and the devil as two opposing forces, for example. Though, again, many of these groups would still say that they are actually monotheistic in that they believe that the good side is superior. But there are certainly dualistical elements in these religions, where the devil figure, or the devil, actually becomes kind of a god, almost. This leads us to the next type of theism, which is monotheism, that there is only one god. And this is present in Judaism, Christianity, and especially Islam. In fact, there is even a term for it in Arabic, Tawhid, that is always at the center of the Islamic faith. It's even in the profession of the faith. La ilaha illallah, there is no god but God. Wa Muhammadu Rasulallah, and Muhammad is his messenger. First part about there being no god but God is an affirmation of the extreme focus upon Tawhid or monotheism that exists in Islam. As I said before, there exists other religions which are also monotheistic, in that they only believe in one god that are not Abrahamic. For example, certain interpretations of both Zoroastrianism and Hinduism could be considered monotheistic. Now, to the last type of belief that has to do with the number of gods, atheism, the belief that there is no God, in that there exists no God. This is a positive statement about the existence of gods, which says that there are no gods. This is not to be confused with Agnosticism, which is about knowledge about God or gods, and Misotheism, which is about hatred of God or gods. Atheism only means the belief that there is no God. Now, having spoken about the terms related to the number of gods, we will go on the terms related to the nature of the god, or the gods, or other forces that exists in the eyes of the believers. First we have the term Pantheism. This is the idea that the divine is present in everything, that there exists a spirit of the world. You can see this in many shamanistic religions and in certain forms of mystical traditions within the Abrahamic faiths related to pantheism, but in a more local sense and in a more divided sense is animism, which is the idea that objects, places and creatures all possess a distinct spiritual essence. So there is a spirit of the river, or a spirit of the steppes, the mountains, and so forth and so on. Every object in the world has their own spirit. Kind of like how Pantheism is that God is everywhere. Here there are several spirits in every place, or in objects like artifacts or the like. The concept of Apotheosis is the concept that a mortal can ascend into godhood. An example of this is that Roman emperors were considered to have ascended into godhood after their deaths. You also have the Christian concept of Jesus returning to God, which could be considered a form of apotheosis as well in Christianity. Speaking about the Christian Abrahamic God, we have creationism, which is the idea that God created the universe, or the universe was created by a god or gods. It mustn't be the Abrahamic God, but in any case, it stands in opposition to Emanationism, which is the idea that the gods are a result of nature. Nature creates gods, or the gods are a reflection of nature rather than the creators of nature. The relationship is in the inverse. Then we have Deism, which is the idea that God created the world but left it for itself afterwards, as he does not concern himself with his creations as taking an active role in it, or God values the free will of his subjects. The reasons can vary, but the nature of this type of God is that he is very distant from the world. Anthropomorphism is the idea of giving something human characteristics. In a context of a religion, it is making the gods more human, or making some sort of force of nature more human. This is also related to the term Zoomorphism, which is giving animal characteristics to gods. For example, think about the Egyptian gods that are half animal, half human, or the Hindu gods that have similar characteristics, or the Greek gods with Zeus taking the form of a bull, becoming completely animalistic, or the Western conception of the Christian devil that sometimes takes animal features. I mentioned the devil because anthropomorphism and zoomorphism is not limited to just being about gods. It can be other religious entities as well. Then there are the terms about the power of the religious entity or god, such as omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, terms that are usually used about the monotheistic gods as attributes. I will not go into detail about these as they are quite complex. Now we are moving to the last category of terms to describe. That is the terms about the relationships to the divine or supernatural in religions. First we have agnosticism, which is the idea that God is unknowable. It is unknown if God exists or not, or it is impossible to know if he exists. Henotheism is the concept to only worship one god even if several other exists. Henotheism differs from monotheism in that you still allow for the existence of more than one god, but you just worship one and you do not worship the other gods that exist. It has been argued that early Israelite religion was henotheistic rather than purely monotheistic based on evidence in the Old Testament and some archaeology. This form of relationship to a god was actually pretty common by the time and place of the early Old Testament, or Torah if you are a Jew. During the time of the Old Testament, the civilizations of the Middle East were just coming out of the chaos of the Bronze Age collapse, which was a terrible collapse of civilizations, which I probably will make a video about in the future. And turning to just one god could have been a response to this chaos. We can see this with the Neo-Assyrians and the Ashur cult, and the Phoenicians with Baal. Though even before the Bronze Age collapse, the Egyptians had tried to go henotheistic with the god Aten and the pharaoh Akhenaten. So there could be other influences. But the theory is that Judaism is part of this pattern, and that is why Henotheism first developed, that later morphed into monotheism. Going from worshipping one god to believing that there is only one god is not that far of a jump in belief. Talking about worshipping gods, there is also the opposite, which is Misotheism, which is active hatred for God or gods. This is not actually atheism, as it implies the belief in the existence of God still. After all, you acknowledge the existence of the divinity, but you hate it, if you apply Misotheism. Relationships also imply ways of having a relation to the divine. One example of a word with regards to this is shamanism. There is no single agreed upon definition of the word shamanism among anthropologists and those that study religions. But there is typically a special connection by one special person to the divine in an altered state of consciousness. Thus you have a relationship with the divine through some sort of person that enters into some sort of trance-like state. This can involve drugs, but also dance, music, and other means of getting into a trance in order to commune with the divine. Shamanism can be seen as a more elitist or hierarchical form of mysticism, where only one person or a few persons can actually come into contact with the divine through mystical means, and thus act as a medium between the divine and between regular believers. I mentioned mysticism, and that is the next term. Mysticism is the idea of becoming one with the divine or absolute, but through getting into a sort of ecstatic state to reach the divine. It must not be a trance, as I said in shamanism, but it must be energetic, and this is much broader than shamanism, and shamanism could be seen as a subset of this. There are a lot of religious groups that have used mysticism, though Kabbalah within Judaism and various Sufi sects within Islam are probably the most commonly seen examples. Though Iconism is also an example of mysticism, as Iconism is the idea that statues, pictures, or other forms of representations gets you into a kind of contact with the divine. In other words, the icons and statues kind of work as a mystical phone line, if the metaphor is allowed to be used. Thus, it's usually not about worshipping the statue or the icon in question, but rather as using it as a medium to get into contact. And iconism has been used in both Christianity and in a lot of other religions, such as in Hinduism with the concept of darshan or viewing of divinity. There has also existed the opposite word, which is aniconism, which is the rejection of icons and idols. This is very common in, for example, Islam that forbids icons, and in Judaism, and in some forms of Christianity. Actually, on the subject of icons and Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, which is usually considered the most icon-using type of Christianity, actually forbade it during the 8th to 9th century, and it was actually kind of frowned upon before that. Hopefully this brief overview of some terms related to God and divinity has been informative and will be useful when you research or study religions or talk about religions. My dear viewers and listeners, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. I will most probably reply to them. And push the like button if you like this video. Please do subscribe as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.